On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 experienced hikers died on a mountain in the Soviet Union. They weren't beginners, they weren't lost, they were some of the most experienced winter mountaineers in the country, and they died running away from their own tent, in the dark, half-dressed, in temperatures that would kill an unprotected person in under 20 minutes. The Soviet government investigated, closed the case, and stamped it with 4 words: a compelling, unknown force. That was the official explanation, and they never tried again. To understand why that answer is so disturbing, you need to understand who these people actually were. They weren't tourists, and they weren't your average thrill seekers. Igor Dyatlov was 23 years old and had already led multiple winter expeditions across the northern Urals. He was the kind of person other experienced hikers trusted with their lives. The 8 people who followed him onto that mountain did so because they believed he was the most capable person in the room, and they were right to believe that. Their route was graded Category 3, the highest difficulty rating in Soviet mountaineering. It required certification, it required experience, it required exactly the kind of cold weather judgment that keeps people alive when everything else is trying to kill them. They set out on January 23rd, 1959, from the city of Sverdlovsk, 11 people in total. However, 2 turned back early due to illness, and 9 marched on. That decision saved 2 lives. The last confirmed diary entry was written on the evening of February 1st, 1959. Cheerful and relaxed, they were close to their next waypoint. The group had started writing a mock newspaper they called the Evening Otterton, named after the peak they were heading toward. They wrote jokes, they made fun of each other, they recorded the temperature and called it manageable. That night, they set up camp on the exposed slope of a mountain the local Mansi people called Kholat Syakhl. It means dead mountain. They chose the exposed slope deliberately, a standard mountaineering technique to avoid avalanche risk from the tree line below. These were not people making amateur mistakes. What happened next remains one of the most exhaustively investigated and completely unresolved mysteries in modern history. When the group failed to make contact at their scheduled return date, a search party was dispatched. They found the tent on February 26. It had been cut open from the inside, not torn, not collapsed, cut deliberately from within with a knife, in multiple places, as if whoever was inside needed to get out faster than unzipping the entrance would allow. The hikers' belongings were still inside: their food, their boots, their coats, even their equipment. And outside in the snow were 9 sets of footprints leading away from the tent and down towards the tree line. Some of the prints showed bare feet, others showed a single sock, and some showed the compressed imprint of someone walking on the outside of their foot, as if their body was already shutting down. They followed those footprints, and at the edge of the tree line, they found the remains of a fire. Next to it, the first 2 bodies. It would be Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, both wearing only their underwear. Their hands were burned, indicating they had been alive at the fire and aware enough to reach into it. The branches above them had been broken as high as 5 meters up, as if someone had been climbing the tree in the dark. 3 more bodies were found shortly after, scattered between the fire and the tent. Igor Dyatlov himself was one of them. He was found face up in the snow, one arm raised slightly, frozen mid-reach towards the direction of the tent. He had died trying to get back. But it was the final 4 that changed everything. They were found 2 months later, buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine, roughly 70 meters from the fire. And this is where the case stops being explainable. Nikolai Tebobrignolis had a catastrophic skull fracture, the kind of damage consistent with an impact from a blunt object moving at high speed. Lyudmila Dubinya and Semyon Zolotayov had multiple broken ribs, bilateral fractures on both sides. A Soviet forensic examiner described the internal damage as consistent with the force of a car crash. But there was no car, no weapon, no debris, no evidence of an explosion. The force that broke them had left no trace of itself on the outside of their bodies. No bruising, no lacerations. Whatever hit them from the inside. And then there was Dubinya's tongue. It was gone, along with her eyes, parts of her lips, and facial tissue, soft tissue, that the official report attributed to decomposition and scavengers. But the other bodies showed none of the same damage. She had been in the same snow, the same cold, the same conditions. Here is where it gets complicated, because for 65 years, everyone who has tried to close this case has eventually been forced to open it again. The avalanche theory is the most common by far. However, it collapses immediately. There was no avalanche debris at the scene, the tent was intact enough to be photographed, and the slope's angle was assessed by investigators at the time as insufficient to produce a slide. And avalanche victims don't just walk 2 kilometers through snow, light a fire, and climb a tree. The military testing theory points to the fact that the Soviets sealed off the region for 3 years after the incident and classified the case files for decades to come. Radiation readings taken from some of the clothing were significantly elevated, and one witness reported seeing glowing orange spheres moving through the night sky in that region on the date of the incident. But no test has ever been confirmed, and no explanation for the radiation that satisfies everyone. The infrasound theory says that low-frequency sound waves generated by the specific geography of the mountain induced mass panic is taken seriously by some researchers. Wind moving across the ridge at the right angle can produce frequencies the human ear cannot hear, but the body absolutely feels. Triggers disorientation, dread, hyperventilation, that overwhelming sensation that something is terribly wrong. It could explain why 9 rational, experienced people ran. It cannot explain the internal injuries. What we are left with is this. 9 people who knew exactly what they were doing chose to destroy their only shelter and run into the Russian winter night wearing next to nothing. Whatever made them do that, they agreed on it, all 9 of them. There is no evidence of conflict, no signs of a struggle between the hikers themselves. They moved together away from the tent as a group, which means they all saw or heard or felt the same exact thing, and none of them survived to say what it was. The case files were finally declassified and released to the public in 2019. Investigators in Russia officially reopened the case and concluded, after a year of review, that the most likely explanation was a specific type of delayed action snow slab, a variant of avalanche activity not previously considered. Most researchers who have spent years on this case rejected the conclusion within weeks. The families of the 9 hikers rejected it immediately. There is a photograph. It was taken by one of the hikers' cameras recovered from the tent, film still inside. The final frame shows something above the tree line, a light source, unidentified. It has been analyzed by researchers for decades and classified as everything from a Soviet missile test to a photographic artifact. Nobody agrees on what it is. The Soviet government gave it 4 words and walked away. 65 years of investigation, declassified files, forensic reviews, and expeditions to the same exact slope where it had happened have not done much better. Dead Mountain keeps its answer, and the 9 people who got close enough to know it never made it back down.